Okay, hello Ashes Nation. Welcome back to the Jankyard episode I can't keep track anymore, which means we're doing something right.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Or we won't take no for an answer, as in no listeners.
Right. One or the other. One or the other.
Ramble into the void.
We are still a podcast about Ashes Reborn, a expandable card game from Planet Games. And I am your host for this evening, Killer Cactus. I have with me the two gentlemen that I usually have with me that have already spoken. One is The Treatment.
Hello, everyone.
And the other is Carl Diaz. Just kidding, it's actually Smendrich.
Yeah, don't oversell me. So if you start at the top of the ELO ladder and then you just keep going down, you'll eventually find me below Carl.
How many scrolls worth on the mouse?
Fewer lately than before, but since I don't know when this is going to release, I make no promises about where you'll find me when this actually drops.
Yeah, you've been on a tear.
You have been.
It's been good. Moving on up.
Taking it down, this Reflections in the Water, Jessa stuff. Tearing it up.
I mean, the fact that Carl said he's now running it is, that's got to give you some indication. We're on to something.
Oh, yeah, that Carl had one Reflections in the Water. It's an interesting tech card. I mean, honestly, so I have a Jessa deck I've been playing that runs one of Reflections in the Water, which is a cheeky way of sending a Turtle Guard in at times, but more often it's like a nice side action that can threaten out, threaten a knight, deal with a creeper. But to be honest, like, Fear does that so well already. I've almost cut it like 3 times, but it's still in the
Can't
list.
Do it. No.
Can't do it.
Gotta keep it there.
I did recently go down from 3 Chance of Transfusion to 2 to add another Fire Archer, given the conversation that was going on the Discord that Carl prompted actually about what's the right number of chance. And I had always run 3 because I've always been of the mind that if you have a ready spell, you run 1x or 3x and that there's no middle ground. But I think Chant of Transfusion, given that you can tutor it and given that I've had multiple games where I've drawn into it when I really don't want to, like when it's not going to impact the board state, has convinced me that I'd rather be tutoring them out of the deck with Ritualist, like 100% of the time, and generally don't want to draw into them. And I think in that case, 2 makes a lot of sense.
So
yeah, this is very much not what our episode's about today, but it is. But I agree with you. Like
you guys convinced me.
I've had Chant in my hand multiple times and like later in the game and been like, I really don't want this. Like, I don't want to spend the die this round to put this thing down. So I think I'm with you. It's I think a 2 of is kind of the sweet spot. If you're not playing 0, I still hold that my favorite number of chance is 0.
You mean just in general?
Again, for with or against?
Yeah. Both. But if you're going to play it, I do kind of like the 2 of.
Yeah, I'm on the 2 train. I mean, 1 is just as good, but 3 has almost always felt bad when I run into it. It's either too late, and I'm not going to get the value to catch up, or it's just like, I wish this was a unit in my hand that I can do something with.
Yeah.
Yep. So Redentor is wrong. That's the conclusion.
There it is.
Well, let's cut this mini episode to 2 minutes.
Yep. If you're not janky or stanky, frog up.
Yeah.
See you guys next time.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's just go through the Discord and pick different users and then talk randomly about how they're wrong. That sounds good. We'll alienate our audience of 10.
Yeah, but we could publish this on TikTok, in 30, like, just small segments. Do 30 seconds of knocking down the Ashes community, and we'll hit millions.
Well, you are in your bikini, so we could be TikTokers.
We should just go on like Las Vegas Boulevard with our phones out, just walk up to random people and be like, how many Chance of Transfusion do you run? Go. Throw that on TikTok.
Oh, you're gonna get people like those I don't know, like back in the day with all the late night hosts that would do the questions and like whether it's geography or otherwise, and just people would fake it, right? Like that no one wants to look stupid, but then they answer in the worst possible way.
Yeah.
And you just got to get enough volume and then cut it together.
Right.
So people are going to be like, oh yeah, no, you definitely need 2. It's like, oh really? And they have no idea what they're talking about.
I like 7. Run 7 chance. It's like, okay.
All right. All of them. Do
Yeah.
it. Okay, so what are we talking about tonight?
Yeah,
then?
what I think we actually want to talk about tonight is PvE a bit, and maybe a little bit of light debate on whether it's good or bad for PvP, and maybe just a wider discussion on how do we continue to attract new players to Ashes in general, but to the PvP world.
Let's get heated.
I mean, I think Red Reigns is excellent. You're going to hear me on this podcast tonight say that I don't think it's helping PvP, and I've said it in the Discord too, but it's awesome, and it's certainly keeping the game running and doing a different cool thing and bringing players to Ashes. I don't think there's, nobody's going to debate that. While I don't necessarily love facing off against the Chimera, I would rather play another player. It is kind of nice to have that available to me if my kids want to play or something. Like the 3 of us can play, and or either me or my youngest son will just be the Chimera, even though we don't need to be. And
just for the voice acting?
Oh, yeah, the voice acting is the main thing. We do it where sometimes I'll let him make decisions, even though the Chimera, makes its own decisions, but I'll just say, you pick who you attack if you want. Makes it a little harder on me and unpaid intern number 1 to beat the thing.
By the way, just a separate shout out. Intern number 2 killed it at GenCon. He was all over it. Love the commentary from him. It was great. He
was so excited about that. All the way home from the show, he kept saying, he's like, Dad, the next time you do a live stream, I have to commentate. Everybody loved me. They said I was awesome. I'm the best commentator on earth. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna disagree with you. I'm sure everybody did tell me. You can do it again next time.
I was waiting. I was just waiting for him to unintentionally slip up, because he was basically standing behind Chaos Theory, to just be like, you should have played the Molten Gold or something, just to accidentally or if someone in the chat, because we were all like we were encouraging him, but there was also a little bit of egging him on with getting him to say some things. And I was like, man, if you just said oh yeah, don't mention this card, and then he slips up,
he would have 100% did that. I mean, if anyone would have suggested anything, he just would have done whatever anyone said.
Yeah, so he was on board. He was just trying to please the audience.
Yes, that's how he just wanted more likes and comments and subscribers. That's where he was. So that was his viral moment, right? He's wanted to be a YouTuber for his whole 9-year life, and that was as close as he's ever got. So, I didn't realize that there wasn't going to be a top cut in the tournament. So I kind of figured if there's a final and I'm not in it, then, I can commentate it. So that was always the plan. And then Nick's like, oh yeah, there's no top cut. We're just going to this 3-0 match right here is it. So I just scrambled to find a solution. I'm like, here you go, dude. Me and Ben are playing. So you're going to do this. Just hold it as steady as you can and say stuff.
Obviously I want to be on topic, but also shout out to Chaos Theory, who brought a really cool deck. It was, first of all, first win for Rin, as far as I know, in any competitive event. He brought it with Chant of Erosion, which since that card came, since Rowan dropped, I don't think has seen any play past the first few weeks, which is super cool. And he played against arguably the meta deck of the moment, which is Herald with Chance, right? I think Stiletto had Chance
he was playing Pact Herald with backed up with Burn, and the deck was no joke, right? Antonio, he's been around for a long time. He's a 1.0 player. He's not very active in the Discord anymore, but he was back in the day, and is always at GenCon and plays very, very well. And his deck was sick and very strong. You know, no worse than any other Herald Pack deck or anything we've seen in our Discord tournaments. Maybe better in some aspects. So
yeah. So congrats to Chaos Theory for sure.
100% for Rin to win that match. I was just kind of floored. I hadn't watched any of Chaos Theory's games during the day, and I didn't get to play him. I didn't come across him, and neither did Ben. So we didn't see much of it, but just awesome. Like to see a deck like that do what he did. And here's the thing about Chaos Theory. He is just fantastic, I feel like, at finding a card that is good, that other people don't think is good, and he'll just like champion it. Like, do you remember when nobody liked False Demon? And he was on the Discord. He's like, False Demon's good. False Demon's good. False Demon's good. And everybody else is like, False Demon, whatever. And now, like, everyone loves False Demon. He did it with Beast Tamer, too. There were a couple other people that kind of championed Beast Tamer with him, but
Beast Tamer was one I championed for sure.
But I was like, there was a long time where I was like, Beast Tamer's garbage, and like, you're just mediocre. And Chaos Theory's like, no, it's amazing. And then played a few times. I was like, yeah, it's really good. And he was doing that with Chant of Erosion, and everybody's just like, oh, it's mediocre, but he made it work, and it did have, I think, a lot of kind of extra synergy in that Rin list. It was really good for it, but still, I just feel like he's always has his thumb on the button of like, here's this card that everyone thinks is mediocre, that is actually something that can swing the meta or see some play in competitive. So, like you said, congrats to him. Kudos for breaking cards that he believes in and showing how they work.
I just think it's really interesting when you look back at the last 3 months, I guess, 4 months of competitive Ashes, to see like the ones that have won so far have arguably been all out of left field, at least as far as community expectations. So you had Lark winning with his mono deck, and it was Illusion of all decks, and no one expected that. You've had post Creeper Errata, Carl playing Creepers and doing like a clean sweep in Blitz and playing it a few times in like AIL and stuff and just killing it with Koji. And Koji hasn't been around in ages. You had No Such Method bringing Fallen in Demona, if I recall, which again, Demona hasn't seen a ton of play in ages, neither has Fallen. And now you have Rin with Chant of Erosion. I just think there's something to sort of the breaking of expectations and having faith in your game plan and your iteration and your testing. And sometimes that's sort of like, obviously where the meta is now, I think is the best ever because it is so diverse and it allows for all of this stuff. But like just people not playing necessarily the common deck and then taking it to the end is really cool to see.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, for sure.
The only thing that I worry about with it is I don't feel like there's a good fast deck in the meta right now. I mean, maybe that's okay. I like when there's a fast deck, but I'm not sure there is a great one. We did see Tristan do fairly well. I mean, I guess my kid had top 4, and there's been other Tristans that have done really well lately, and Tristan's pretty fast. The deck Ben was playing is very fast. But that's about it, and it does get shut down kind of easily if you first 5 correctly against it.
How fast is like what you would want to see? Like how fast, and then how fast is too fast?
I mean, that's we could have
Bottom of round 2.
We could have a whole podcast about that.
Probably, yeah.
I think there should be a deck that can threaten to win in round 2. That's going to be a very unpopular opinion. People don't like that, but I don't like going to round 5. So it's a matter of opinion, I guess. I like quicker games. A lot of it's because my piloting gets worse as the game goes on, so I like to get them done as quickly as I can. I don't have brain fatigue or something, but I also think it's a bit of a check and balance to the slow battlefield grindy control decks. When there's not a fast deck like that, you can kind of just default to a grind out the battlefield type deck, and there's nothing to really check you. But anywho, like I said, that's a topic for a different day.
Yeah, I'll just say on Chaos Theory's win, I'll just echo all of the plaudits and add my, I guess, signature note of bitterness in that I was very much on the erosion as a bypass tool train. I played for a while. I was trying to make this Brennan Chen of Erosion deck with work with Frostback Bear. But I think it's really instructive to compare my list with the Rin list because I was kind of all in on that bypass plan. So I had 3x Mindfog Owl as well, which makes some sense because you get access to Charm, which gets you Sympathy, Pain, and a burn list. And then but I also insisted on running 2x Regress, which is just like another variation on that same idea. And it doesn't have the synergy of the battlefield control elements of Rin buffing his units while simultaneously reducing the attack of the opponent's units. And so it was all in on bypass in a way that made it actually really difficult to win. I think that deck was sort of like 50-50, but like I think it's been a really solid idea, but the difference between me and Chaos Theory as a player is like I got frustrated, dropped it, never went back to it, never tried it in a different Phoenixborn. It was just like, whatever, on to other things, whereas he made it work in a really effective way.
See, that's the issue, because you've said that now before, but the difference was it was Realm of the Absurd and Clue taking it over. So you have all these ideas. You just got to follow through. You got to be the leader. Take that genius, all those good ideas you have, take them to the finals. Maybe the collection is your time.
I like just playing Killer's deck now.
Yeah, that's the other option. We all just play killer decks and hope we can do well.
Well, I mean, I'm the same way. I build all these decks. I play them one time, and then I build something else, and I let other people that can pilot for 4 rounds take it and play and do well with it. That's just what I do.
All right. So, yeah, how is PvE killing PvP, Killer? Lay it out.
Let's now inflame everyone.
Like, you asked me that question, and I honestly, off the top of my head, I don't have like an argument queued up for this. All I can say is when I go on the Discord, when I look at stuff, when I hear people talk, which isn't very much anymore, and see stuff, there's a lot of PvE chatter and not much PvP chatter. And I just can't like separate that in my head from saying, well, we're giving out PvE sets now. There are 13 PvP cards in a set now instead of 20. So there's 7 less cards that come into the card pool. And we're highlighting this new mode of the game that is completely different from PvP Ashes. And it's an exciting thing that people want. It's a selling point, and people are buying it for that. And, even though it's compatible with PvP and that's great, it's not the selling point of it, right? It's not how it's advertised. It's like, look, here's this cool chimera and you can fight against it. And by the way, you can play these decks against each other. Yeah, but if someone just buys Red Rains, they only have one deck. They can't play against like the person they're fighting that chimera with. So I feel like you put all of that together, and while it's great that it's keeping Ashes going, and I mean, I'm supporting it. I always will support it. I want the game to continue. I think that purely from a selfish PvP standpoint, which again, I'm not really much of a PvE guy, so I don't care too much about it. And that's why I'm saying selfish here. Like I just kind of care about PvP. I think it would be better if we got, 2 decks with 20 cards. And that was the focus, right? It was 1v1 PvP focus. I feel like we would be seeing a bit more chatter. Maybe our events have a few more people. Maybe not. I don't know. But that's just my gut feeling.
Yeah. So I think
Schmendrick's rebuttal.
So I guess I'm taking like I think PvE is neutral to like very mildly positive for PvP. And here's why, sort of logically. I think there's a lot of sorting that happens in tabletop communities in general, but especially between card game players, between the huge universe of co-op first and solo LCG players, or to use the Fantasy Flight Games trademarked term, the living card game, or just expandable card games, kind of more neutral term. So players who've played like what's that, Aeon's End or whatever that's called. I don't even know that game's name, but in addition to the FFG games, Marvel Champions, Arkham, I think a lot of those players might dabble in competitive, but I know a lot of them are strictly co-op solo players. And, we've talked at length in the past, and maybe we will again tonight, about some of the stress, the competitive stress we all feel in Ashes at times. And I think that helps explain why that sorting happens. I think there might be the most crossover in like Arkham, which is built on the kind of Netrunner clicks architecture with its action economy, where you get Netrunner players who really like Arkham, and vice versa. But otherwise, I really think there is quite a lot of sorting that happens. I feel like I am a bit of an outlier in that world, in that I got into card games during the pandemic. I'd played Magic the Gathering when I was like 12, 13, very casually, and then basically not played card games again, played a bunch of board games, came back during the pandemic, and was all through the Team Covenant co-op games. And they introduced Ashes, and I was like, I really enjoyed playing competitive games back in the day, and like I would like a competitive card game, and I've gotten really into it, obviously. So I think in the context of that sorting, I think basically that's where I come down to the neutral and maybe very slightly positive, is like, I think it's basically an orthogonal audience to the competitive card gamer audience, which seems to me where we are competing more with the big TCGs that exist out in the world, or maybe even the more niche TCGs like the Flesh and Bloods, for example, where we've lost a lot of our top competitive players to Sorcery or to Flesh and Blood, that have in-person competitive games. So I think adding a whole bunch of people who are not very interested in PvP, I think is good for the subscription, which keeps the competitive game alive, obviously, and it keeps new cards being printed. And Nick is doing a fantastic job printing PvP relevant cards in these sets. And I think if we get 5% of those players to try the competitive game will add a very small amount to our competitive player base. But honestly, I think at the end of the day, the problems with competitive Ashes are the problems that we've talked about that, led the Shuffle Bus folks to leave, which is lack of institutional support from Plaid Hat for the competitive game. I just think there's only so much that we can do to appeal to hardcore competitive card gamers who seem really driven by, to a large extent, the availability of local metas by a game that, with a game that's just in its distribution model antithetical, I think, in some ways to building a healthy local meta, given the exclusivity period through Team Covenant. I'm obviously spitting some really hard takes about, some of the structural issues of the game, but I think we can have fair disagreements about those. I'm not deeply attached to those opinions, but I think the persistence of the challenges of building the competitive game, I think, have reinforced for me that there's probably something structural in how Ashes is promoted and distributed that is probably the deeper headwind here. So I think emotionally, I very much share your feeling, Killer, that on some level, I love PvE, obviously, in lots of settings. It's a little frustrating to see a whole bunch of people come in and it not boost the PvP side of the game, which has been my Ashes experience and why I picked up Ashes in the first place, and which I think is just an incredible card gaming experience. But I think logically, it's hard to then take the next step to say PvE is hurting it. I don't think those 7 cards make a marginal difference that we're not getting. I think the issues, maybe run a bit deeper with how, with where the game is and what the game can command in terms of, a local meta scene.
It's tough, right? Because I do think that most of the problems come from, I guess if you want to call it the institutional side or infrastructural side of things, how the game is deployed. And it's interesting to consider whether the introduction of PvE has taken away any players who were already, say, finding stress or difficulty, scheduling games, or even just finding casual games. Because the casual game numbers, as far as anecdotally, seem to have increased. Whenever I'm looking, I usually have it open on my hashtag open on my screen on my second monitor. There seem to have been an uptick in casual games available, which is cool. But at the same time, I noticed that it might not be the same names, or they might not be recurring people, aside from a few outliers that have become new staples, I guess, to the community. And so it's interesting to know whether people have slipped away, like Chaos Theory and Impossible German, for instance. They had made the argument that, granted, their time is taken away with playtesting, but they've moved away to PvE. I just don't know how many people that translates to in total out of the player pool that already existed versus the community aspect of just lower discussion lately, and whether that's a result of the delay between the last release and the new one, or the fact that there are fewer cards. It's tough when there have been no new Phoenixborn and there are fewer cards. How long on a week-to-week or monthly basis can that generate conversation? That's a tough thing to say. Whereas it used to be, last year or the year before that, it was regularly every 3 months. There'd be a lot to discuss. But you still got the lulls near the end of it. And then there was the anticipation, and then the release, the previews would come out, and that would generate new discussion. So it was ever evolving. And I don't know. I think that there are going to be new entrants ultimately who see Ashes because of solo and co-op and come into PvP. But those might not be players who play PvP online. And that is a tough thing to even track. right? Like how many people are like, hey, this is great, but I only want to play at kitchen table with my kids or, my partner or some local friends. Like, every now and then someone jumps in. It's like, hey, I brought this to my, local store and I'm playing with just a few friends. And that's all they'll ever do. They'll never jump into the strange online scene that might seem intimidating. Like I still remember that I was intimidated to jump in, but I did it, but I know that's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's really tough to keep track of that.
I think, just to say two things very quickly. One is, I think the thing that we have to be alert to is that the counterfactual that matters isn't, would Chaos Theory or Impossible German still be playing competitive if not for PvE? It's, would those players still be in the game? Because I think, people's interests change, things come onto the scene. I know Impossible German's really interested in Star Wars Unlimited, like the collectible game that FFG is going to release. Lorcana is coming out, which is generating a lot of interest. And if you think about it as like a series of stages that a player goes through in their course of their life with the game, if their interest is declining in competitive, I'd rather them, downshift into PvE and continue their sub, finding enough value there that they continue to support the game financially, than dropping the game entirely. And I think it's a pretty risky bet to not have that PvE option available to players and risk higher exits. And then the second point I'll make just very briefly is that, so we're recording this in mid-August. So we just got July stats from Dijon for Ashteki, and what the data shows is actually a remarkably stable pool of not the same players, but about low hundreds, 100 to 120 players playing every month on Ashteki. And like that largely has not moved. It's down a little from where it was in kind of the heights of fall 2021, but like the fact that we're comparing ourselves against what at that time it was still pretty pandemic influenced moments, and we've managed to retain that admittedly very low volume of players on Ashteki does suggest that there is some stability to the player pool, but it's also not grown. It's not grown at all. So I think we don't have to wonder about some of the numbers. We're sort of get 100 players a month on Ashteki. I think the game would be a lot healthier if it were like 200 or 400. I've put up LFG requests, in the last week while I was on vacation and had more time during the day to play to try and test some decks for the team event. And like, I had 3-4 go completely wanting. Now that may be because I have a terrible reputation, but I think it's more likely that just no one's around when I was looking to play.
I mean, so there's also the counter argument to, Impossible German and Chaos Theory, or the counter example, I should say, not argument, that Lark, for instance, he was a playtester for a long time and recently had stated that if it wasn't for PvE, then he never would have had the confidence to jump into PvP because there was no sort of playground to learn the deck and the cards and test new things without just jumping into competitive, which can be, as we've mentioned, can be intimidating because it is such a high skill game and because deck building can be so difficult that if you just jump in and, the only person available is Carl, and, not to disparage Carl at all, but he jumps in your game, you've never heard the name, you think it's just some player playing, and then all of a sudden you just you're whooped. It can feel bad and intimidating enough that maybe you are worried to jump back in. So that the playground aspect of PvE, I think, is interesting. And I hope that because it's only new, Red Reigns is still only a few months old, that as another set or two come out, just by volume of players who are interested in co-op, some will be like, hey, now I've been playing this for a while. I got a handle on all the cards. I want to see if my strategies against the Chimera can, work against players, or maybe I want to just try out the other format of this game. Or maybe there's, people who play co-op with each other like, hey, now I want to play versus you, and what else is around? Like, is there an online community?
I guess we just have to see how many people actually do that. And I don't know how much data we really have with just the first set. I get nervous once we get to like the fourth or fifth set of this. And I mean, eventually over time, it's just going to be marketed as, here's a Chimera, right? And once the last 5 sets are that, I feel like it's going to start feeling more like Ashes is a one-player game now, because that's what's being sold. If we just keep selling that. And I mean, eventually, I don't disagree that some people have come over, and we've seen some newer players over the last few weeks. I mean, there's a reason I was doing, or have been and still will, do all these dual decks. There were new players that were asking for that stuff. I think Lark was the person that brought it up and inspired me to do it. And there are new players that are really into those decks because they're 2 colors and generally easy to pilot. The last couple I made are a little tougher, but I'm running out of the easy Phoenixborn to make good decks for. We have seen some new people. That's encouraging. I'm just afraid once we're like 5 sets down this road, does it just turn into a one-player game now because that's how the game is being sold and marketed after that?
Well, yeah, so on that point, what is it that we can do as a community, if anything, to increase the numbers, to increase reach or get people more involved? It could be that there's just a lot of quiet people. I mean, you look at the server, members, and it's way higher, and there's tons of names I've never even seen make a comment, right? Or the only comment that they might make is a rules question in one of the rules channels, and hey, I've been playing this for a little bit or whatever. What is there that we as community members can do? Because one of the biggest issues, and this is only something that I've noticed in the last week as I was interested in looking at different games, whether it was Lorcana or I looked into Doomtown and looking back at Netrunner, things like that. Other sites, and I'm going to use Doomtown as an example only because it was something I looked up the other day.
Stop shopping. God.
Yeah.
You're so disloyal.
The company's website pushes the online platform, their techie platform. It's actually funny looking at it. I'm like, oh man, this is all the same code base basically. And I still think that that's one of the biggest issues that we have in terms of just Plaid Hat not outside of Ashcons, not really pushing the game, not pushing the platform. Obviously it's I understand the business perspective, but you do want to grow the numbers. You do want to grow the community. I don't know how else you do it if it's not directly from Plaid Hat Games. And then there are smaller, I think, new player friendly issues that we have, among them Ashes Live not having really, outside of us posting on the wiki tailored sets for new players, there's really no comparison to other deck building sites, whether it's Arkham Horror or Netrunner or Pokemon, that you can look up and see, oh, this is highly rated by multiple people, and here's comments on what's good or what's not or what you should replace. It's just a blank slate of anybody who's willing to publish something. And it's really hard if you don't know the game to filter out cruft or not cruft. And if you get the bad experience where you're just like overwhelmed by options, it's like, well, what do I do?
I mean, is it time to just bring over the the Arkham DB, Netrunner DB, or Codebase and just build an alternative to Ashes.live? I mean, I think that's a big problem. Skak seems like pretty convinced that he's not interested in building a site that does those things. So, like, I don't know. Maybe it's just time we do that.
I think the biggest part is you need someone maintaining it, right? Skak does a fantastic job maintaining the thing, and it takes a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, sure.
And, I don't have that time or effort, and I don't know who, if there's somebody that does. It is very interesting looking at a different game. I mean, I'm on the Lorcana train. I haven't really been in any other game for a long time. And it's nuts. I mean, obviously, this is a completely different animal. You have a Disney IP that does a million things differently than Ashes could ever do. But this game's not even released. And we've got multiple deck building sites. We have a companion app for the game that you can download today and build decks on.
Well, the official one, yeah.
Yeah, you have that, and then you have multiple deck building sites where you can build decks and comment. There's 100 Facebook groups where people are throwing decks up all the time and commenting on them and fixing stuff publicly. You've got, I mean, the game's not released yet, and there's already a meta, and we know what the top 5 meta decks are. Like, those
there's
are known.
TTS mods, there's an unofficial client.
Right, yeah, they have all that stuff. Yeah. And, I mean, there's so much more buzz and more players and more manpower, right, to generate all that stuff. But where I see it's interesting, it's just so... It blows my mind that we have a game that's not even released, and we know what the metagame is. And if you asked me what the Ashes one is, I couldn't tell you. And I guess that's a lot of people are gonna say it's a good thing because it's hard to figure out the meta because the cards are so balanced. Maybe it is, but I also think it's just that there's not that devotion to figuring it out. And there never has been amongst the Ashes player base. We're interested in enjoying the game more than we are stress testing it. We always have been, with the exception of maybe JK and his Brennan list. That was the stress test as Ashes ever got. And then we eradicated away
on that.
Really? Okay.
Only because I think we do go through flows of meta. They are not as clear cut as trading card games like Pokemon or Disney, where it's like these are the top decks because there's just volumes of people playing it, and then eventually there'll be rotations or otherwise to change it. Like we've had the hope, meta. I think Herald is definitely like if you had a new player come in and they were like, what decks are the strong ones? I think even as a community, we could agree on probably somewhere between 3 and 5 decks, or at least general, like not specific decks. It's not the same where it's like, here's sort of 25 out of 30 cards that are unchanged across all these, good decks, but at least what's generally strong in the meta. I think you could say like, okay, there's going to be a Herald Pact type of list. There's, here are the decks obviously that have won recently. You can always point to those. And then Tristan's been pretty strong and, whatever. Right. But you're not going to point someone to Vicky or Astria. Sorry, Ninja. But like it's just not, that's not what you're going to point to. So I think it's more broadly defined, but there's still, we go through these phases.
Yeah, I mean,
Like Noah would be, you would point to a Noah list and say, well, Noah, like strong time, illusion probably, like tempo Noahs.
Yeah, and this gets into a whole other argument that, in some ways was the argument that helped birth this podcast and the Phoenix League, which was like the conversation and the frustration that the Shuffle Bus guys had about the lack of the development of a meta, and never having been around a large scale competitive card game that has a meta before, other than like I sort of spectate a bunch of Netrunner but largely don't play. Like I don't really understand the value of having a meta game, so yeah, I'm very much in the camp of that's not a problem, but that may just be because I've never been in a game that has one. I can certainly understand the way in which that helps give more direction to like deck building and experimentation when you are trying to figure out how to respond to the meta. And sometimes, and I've said this before, that like sometimes the directionlessness of like the deck building can be discouraging to me, where it's just like the game's so open and there are certainly tech cards in the card pool like Reflections in the Water that could have really powerful impacts given a certain metagame, but knowing whether or not that metagame is going to show up in any given tournament is sort of impossible because of the way the game runs. But I think there's real opportunity. We're still in the first year of the Phoenix League. I wonder if we should sort of do collections on a 6-monthly basis just so that we pick up the pace of experimentation around the competitive scene, for example, and to keep the Phoenix League a little bit more intense, because I think one thing I've noticed is that is sapping a lot of the competitive energy is like a whole bunch of people, most of the dedicated, well, maybe not most, a really good chunk of the dedicated competitive player base at this point has gotten their collections invite. And so that sapped some energy from the Phoenix League games, which I think were really exciting, the first 3-4 months of the year in particular.
Yeah, that's something I strongly agree with. Like there's been a lot of, I've got my 12, so if I don't schedule this week, I don't care, or maybe I won't report the game if I win because I don't care, if the list is shown. That's, I think, a really valid point. But at the same time, I don't blame anybody, because it's like we're figuring this new format out. And ultimately, I think it's been a boon for the community and for competitive.
But where I was going to go is like, I think it'd be interesting to like the competitive format that people have been experimenting with. And like, I give a ton of credit to Dijon. Like Dijon, in addition to running the, Ash Techie, also I think has come up with some of the most engaging and new player friendly competitive formats we've seen, including the carousel format. I think that was Dijon's baby initially. And then more recently he's been playing with like the Chimera campaign deck format, where it's like a deck that you have taken through a campaign or could legally build via the campaign rules in Red Reigns. That's the deck that you play competitively to see how that works. And like, I think that's a super cool idea. And I would love to see, for example, a tournament, where to participate, like you can't be on the ELO leaderboard and the decks that you're going to run are going to be those co-op Chimera decks, maybe that's two ideas that should just be split. So maybe there should just be a tournament for folks who don't show up on the ELO leaderboards, and separately a tournament for folks to run their favorite like Red Reigns deck. But I think there are ways that we could be doing a little bit more to organize competitive games that draw new players in. I think the teams tournament has that potential too, especially if we like mandated that 2 experienced players bring a third player along who's newer to the community, which I don't know how long Fred's been around. He's a really strong player. I think he's newer, but like he's playing on Carl and Brian's team, and that would seem like an awesome experience. So
I like the idea of a Red Reigns tournament because I do think that pulls in both camps. Like if you put it out there and people are like, hey, like this is my favorite Red Rains deck. And now I get a chance to try it in a limited meta effectively. That would probably bring in some new blood, which could be interesting just even as a test of like, well, what is strong in the meta, right? Like that, like what are the new cards plus of a solid base? I think that could be really interesting.
Maybe this is where the Jankyard hosts our first tournament. When the nature cards, maybe it's when the nature cards are revealed, and then we put something together like that where you can't be on the ELO list or whatever the restriction is. I'm sure the experienced players that aren't qualified to play in that tournament would be more than happy to coach people. I don't know if there's some kind of, maybe there's a mentoring aspect to it. You get in the tournament, you get assigned a coach that helps you build your deck and talks you through your matchups and gives you advice. And then I don't know, but I mean, I will throw out that I got extra dice, I got extra promo cards and stuff from GenCon that I said I would take and give away on the podcast. So I have stuff like
really
that we could give away.
It reminds me when I think I was in my first year playing, I joked about how fun it would be to have a blood puppet tournament where I was the blood puppet for like Matt or, get a senior, more experienced player to coach me and like they win along with their coached player.
Yeah. I
also, I can't say I mentioned it before because I don't know which episode it was and if it's been released yet, but Ninja's effort on the mobile app, it's not going to be, I don't think, groundbreaking or anything and like change the number of players drastically, but I do foresee it having the potential to create an uptick in casual games and people actually joining pickup games, because one of the limitations as of now is that you have to be at your computer. And if, for anyone traveling or otherwise, that can be prohibitive. And I also know that I've been playing just as part of trying to test the app. Like I've been playing on the bus or the train to work, several times, and I otherwise would be missing out, at least a game or two daily. And so I hope that is another place that people, can jump into once it does get finished. I mean, you can still use it now. It's fairly solid. There are some things you can't do, but I think it's worth people if they're like, man, I wish I could play today on vacation. Do you have a phone with you? Because just download the app and get going.
So we should probably explain, how do you play on the mobile app? So I've never done it. I don't even know how to do it. But I'm sure people are going to listen to this that don't know. Yeah,
so it is an Android-only app. It's an APK file. It's like a file type. In the software dev channel on Discord, there is, I believe, a pin post with the shared Google Drive that Ninja has set up, which contains the app, and he updates it, whenever he can. And you download it to your phone and then run the app, and it will install it. And it's made in Unity, so it shows up like any other app on your home screen. You open it up. He just recently implemented that when you log in, it'll save the details so that you don't have to do it every time. You can import your decks, and it has the lobby, so you can see if there are any open games, but you can also create a game. You can even spectate games, which is something that's really cool, because sometimes I just use that. Like if I know that there's going to be a Top Cut game or something, and I'm in the car, on the way home or something, it's just like, hey, this is cool. Like I can pop it open. So yeah, it's really easy. You just go to the software dev channel and install it. Unfortunately, no luck if you're an iOS user, but
okay. And I will tell, if anyone's listening that cares about this, I play all of my games on an iPad now. I haven't had my PC broke a while ago. I haven't bought a new one, as you guys know. But I mean, I have an iPad that I play all of my games on. It works basically fine. I have to have the chat closed. That typically doesn't impact me because I'll keep opening it and closing it. I have famously complained one time that I lost a game because I had the chat closed. When that was Matt beat me with his Xander Meditate Your Whole Deck Fallen deck, and he kept recurring things with Memorialize, and I never knew what he recurred unless I opened the chat to see, like, hey, he took back this card this turn. And I always had the chat off, so, like, he memorialized an Earthquake back at one point that I missed. And was, like, fairly certain that all three... I'd, like, check the discard pile, repeatedly, and all three Earthquakes were in there, so I, like, wasn't worried about an Earthquake. But then he, like, stole one. He took one back, and I just didn't see that. And then I got Earthquaked and had no clue it was coming. So I whined about that for a minute, and then I was like, it doesn't matter. I wasn't winning anyway, but as long as you're not worried about that, it's perfectly fine to play Azteki on an iPad for the iOS users out there that don't get to use the mobile app yet.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I feel like at times this conversation got a little negative, and I certainly contributed to that. But I feel
It's
like...
all your fault.
Yeah. No, I'm used to that. I think most things are. I think... but I think there are a lot of green shoots, actually. And, like, this is why I think ultimately PvE is neutral to mildly positive. Is, like, I would much rather have... Like, if I think about where do I want to recruit a pool of new players from... Obviously, we can complain about the lack of organized play support, the lack of local game store support built into the model. But, like, if any of those things come along, or as we continue to innovate what the competitive scene is online, I'd much rather be doing that in the context of having a large pool of people who like playing Ashes, even if it's just PvE Ashes. And I shouldn't say just, even if it's PvE Ashes. That's the pool of people I want to be trying to convert to PvP. Those are like warm leads, to use like marketing language. And that's a really valuable thing to have. Plus, it keeps the lights on and keeps Nick employed to keep developing cards. And these are all profoundly good things. So I feel pretty bullish that, like, we are better off now than we would have been without PvE. To go back to the original prompt for the conversation.
And I don't think I'm going to disagree with that. Again, I'm happy that PvE is here. I'm happy that we get to continue playing Ashes and being given new cards however we get them. Because I'm very aware that if we didn't have PvE, we might not have new cards. So that's great. I want to keep having new stuff to build with. I'm sad that I only get to build with 13 cards and not 20. And I'm scared after a bunch of releases that we lose the focus on PvP at all. I feel like it might go away. But regardless, I mean, those are good points, right? We do want to recruit from a pool of people that like the game. And if we're trying to grow the PvP and specifically the competitive player base, you guys are right that we probably need to address the main issues. And I don't know how much control we have over stuff like organized play, but I do think that the intimidation and the new player training and stuff like that can be addressed somehow. I mean, if a new player knew what the meta deck was, that they can come in and play, I mean, I think that'd be a step forward, because right now we don't know what it is or what they are. Anyone playing Lorcana right now that wants to get into the game can go find one of the 5 meta lists and build it tomorrow. And it'll take them 2 seconds.
Right. And so that way that you kind of remove a variable in
Right.
learning the game, which is, you can focus on your own piloting skill and the confidence that the deck you're playing is at least competitive. And back to the point about likes, like, not only do we not have a meta deck, we couldn't even tell you what the top 10, we can't point you to the top 10 decks in the game in any reliable way.
Yeah. So those are things like there are the two separate issues ultimately to growing the community. And the first is something that is outside of our control, and that's how to get how to find the new players. And in that sense, I think PvE is right now the only way to get the exposure in the first place of Ashes the game. Because it's, unless you even know about Plat Hat games in the first place, the only other thing that you're probably going to be looking up is what other cool solo cooperative card games are out there. So that's sort of out of our control, but everything else in terms of how we foster new players, I think there are lots of options for us as a community and for any individual who wants to take the reins to do. The wiki, I think, has been huge. I think the mobile app will be a boon. New tournaments that are specifically geared towards newer players, or uncompetitive, unranked players, and formats that potentially merge the two worlds, like the Red Reigns Chimera thing that Dijon started. And then just whether it's the wiki, whether it's ashes.live, nailing down as a community what decks are good for people to start with. If you want to call them the meta decks, that's great. I mean, obviously, it's hard when it shifts and when we don't play those same decks over and over again. But that's another reason I recommend anyone jumping onto the challenge of just playing the same deck over and over again, trying to get a certain number of wins with one deck at a time, and building that experience. And then we can get stats that way.
Right, but you got to know, as a new player, you got to know that deck is good to want to play it 10, 15 times in a row.
Well, I meant for the rest of us, right?
Yeah.
If you're putting out the dual decks, those are decks that we as a community should try and invest time in. If all of us put in 5 to 10 games in a couple of those decks, right? Even if there's only 10 people, all of a sudden you got a deck that has 100 plays. And that's more than virtual, unless you're Carl, that's more than any other deck gets played, right? And that would be really cool if there was some way of aggregating those separate plays together to say, hey, across all of these different skill levels, here is how this deck performs. And then we can change it. We can, drop it as a recommendation, or we can put it to the forefront and say, this is one of those decks.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, do we have our 14 or 15 points we came up with in the Get Good episode? Is that on the wiki?
They are on there. They are not all filled in. I asked you guys to do some write-ups. I haven't filled them all in yet.
Yeah, I know, and I ignored you completely.
Most of them are there.
Okay. So now I'm just thinking of ways to help people that start the game understand it a little faster, because there's so many decision points in this game, and it's I'm trying to come up with why is Ashes so difficult for new players to grasp, because I feel like it really is. We've said multiple times that the learning curve for this game is huge. It's a very high skill game, the very high pilot heavy game. We keep saying that, but I don't know that anyone's ever cleanly articulated exactly why that is. And we do that, we skirt around that with, here's the tips on how to get better at the game. We kind of skirt around that. And again, this is coming from me playing a different game a bunch over the last couple weeks. I sit here and play Lorcana, and I'm like, all right, I have a guy on the board, and in Lorcana, your guy can do two things every turn. One of two things every turn. But the easiest thing and the way you win is you just turn your guy sideways and you get points. Like, you don't have to choose, I don't have to attack the Phoenix board and worry about getting blocked or guarded. I don't have to pick a unit to attack, and I don't have to know, where to send my guy for the best outcome. Now, the other thing they can do is challenge, and in that case, you do have to send your guy and another guy. So that's a decision point. But, like, how you win the game is you just turn the card sideways. You don't have to worry about that. And Ashes, like, how you win the game is you have to take that guy that's on the board and figure out the exact right time and place to point the thing.
That is a super interesting question. I think, like, that, I don't think anyone has ever, we say sequencing all the time, but other than that, no one's ever gotten into the details.
Yeah.
And I would think at a high, like at a real quick think through, three things stand out to me. So the first is that it's unlike any other card game in the design, whether you're talking about Magic or Flesh and Blood or any of the solos. The combination of the resource system, like fixed 10 dice that you start with right away, first 5, and it never changing, that's very different. And I think that takes a while to wrap your head around how each round should I be spending this, whereas most games have some sort of ramp. And there are a lot of people who, when they play trading card games or like dueling card games, the ramp either introduces you to your possibilities or limits your possibilities because you can only spend so much, or you know that, like, you're going to get more powerful and you have time to build up, whereas here you're just dropped in, like, this is what you have, this is what you always have. I think that's a big difference just in terms of mental space for players who are experienced in other games. The other thing is, like you said, the number of variables, I guess, in the options, because everything, it's not like, and this is, maybe I'm misremembering, but in Magic, it's like swing everything or swing like nothing, and you can have multiple defenders or whatever. But in Ashes, like, you have wounds that stick around, you have recovery that affects whether you're going to trade. The whole idea of what is efficient in Ashes is hard to grasp. It's even hard to explain for experienced players. It's not like some games like Lorcana where you can just take 2 or 3 different cards that all have either the same stat line or the same cost and say, this one's just outright better than another, right? Because collectible card games tend to have that much larger card pool.
Yeah.
And whether it's the rarities or otherwise, there are cards that are just strictly better than others, and they manage the balance of it by the number of card, like the number of copies available of that card. Whereas in Ashes, you don't have that. Everything, to an extent, is viable depending on the synergy, and the abilities on each cards can be complex in their interaction.
The one thing I'll say is, I do think this is another way in which PvE potentially helps, in that it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out how important playing to the board is. Like, I spent a lot of my Ashes career like, don't know what to do, don't know what my opponent could play, better just swing face and like get some damage on the board. And like, that's like the worst thing you can do in Ashes. Do not do that. Pass, like, play a book. Don't swing face, basically, until you have a path to lethal. I mean, there's more nuance to it than that, but like, if that's a rule that you play with for like your first 3 months, you'll do profoundly better than I did for my first 3 months playing the game. And that's actually something that the Red Rains mode teaches players really effectively, because you damage the Chimera by killing their units, and so it merges the win cons of board control plus base damage, and the huge health pool of the Chimera relative to a Phoenixborn makes it just not very effective to go face in the game. And so like yes, in theory there's so many things you can do, but actually I think one of the ways in which Ashes gets profoundly easier is that you learn that a lot of those things you could do are just suboptimal basically 9 times out of 10, and you shouldn't be even thinking about them, so you just drop them from the option set. And I think there is ways in which PvE starts to train you to recognize that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I guess in addition to that, the other thing I was thinking about is the combination, or even individually, but the first 5 mechanic can really throw a loop in people. Like, it's not like you're getting a random hand of cards, maybe you mulligan 1 or 2, and then whatever. The amount of potential counterplay and how important round 1 can be is hard to grasp for new players. And when on top of that, you have, as a new player experience, bad precons, that, or if you have people who are willing to go outside of the precons, but you don't have a good place to source known meta decks that are like, here's a good deck, here's what you should play in your first 5, let it autoplay for a while. That can be really hard to know even where you made mistakes. And if you don't know where you made mistakes, then it's hard to learn. And if you can't learn or improve at a game, then it's easy to become disinterested.
Yeah, you're right. And the first round, like the fact that there's very little comeback potential in this game, at least, I shouldn't say that because I've seen more games where people have come back lately than I have before, but it's kind of a known issue in Ashes that if you lose the first round by a significant margin, you're going to have a really tough time winning this game. That's an issue for new players because they're not very good in the first round, or they don't know how to play the first round a lot of time. And if they fall behind, it can be kind of a feel bad. I do like what Schmendrick said about Red Rains teaching you to attack the battlefield rather than attack the Phoenixborn. And it is an issue that's hard to get your head around. That's why I gave my son the deck that I gave him to play at GenCon, because the kid never plays the game and he does not understand that concept at all. Like, he doesn't get to kill the units. He just wants to attack the Phoenixborn. So I'm like, all right, here's the deck where that's what you want to do. Like just put as many guys on the board as you can and swing them at the Phoenixborn and then finish with burn spells. Yeah. But as I've been building these dual decks, I laid out this matrix, right, of styles and pressure points that I try and put every deck into. And my styles, right, are tall, wide, and control. And I think I only have one wide deck so far. And the reason is, I keep thinking about that. Every time I build a deck, it's like 9 times out of 10, it's a control style deck. And it almost doesn't matter what the pressure point is. But that's because the right thing to do typically in Ashes is control the board. That's how you win the game most of the time. So most of these decks I'm building are control decks, and I keep thinking to myself, like, man, I want to build. Like, I want to put more wide decks in here. I want to put even more tall decks in here. I have a couple of those, but still not nearly as many as the control style. And I'm putting these big write-ups into the decks, and I keep saying the same things in the write-ups.
You got to put in Turbo Mill.
Well, I did that. I did part of it anyway. You need 3 colors for Turbo Mill, which is part of the problem.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
But so I did finally put a mill deck in, and I was afraid to do it because mill decks are harder to play. But when I built the Leo, I was like, I kind of have to make this a mill deck for him. But I was getting frustrated a little bit with how much I was using control as a style, because I wanted to showcase a couple more, more of the other styles of deck, but there are just not a ton of Phoenixborn or good decks, especially in the meta right now, that want to be doing that. Like there's not a lot of decks that want to go wide and swing around the blockers into face. There's a deck here or there that wants to make something big and tall. I mean, I haven't done Maoni yet. Like, that's going to be a tall deck. But it's just most of the time the answer is control the battlefield. And to be honest, I start getting bored sometimes with that like line of play where it's like every game is just about the board. And I'm going to, like, a part of me has wanted to start playing that Leo Turbo Mill and stuff a little more, just because I get bored of getting into these kind of battlefield grindy stalemate games. But that's, again, a topic for another episode. The end point is, yeah, like, new players need to know to attack units and not the Phoenixborn. And I just think there's ways that we as a community can probably help and give more resources out there for people to read up on or listen to and learn some of those core concepts so that they can go on Ashteki and not get blown out right away.
This is my repeat call, both for you two, as well as any of the top 10 players. There is a strategy page on the wiki, and I've started it. It's not fully populated, but there's a ton, I think, that could be written up in bullet point form, you know, like just things, tips. Obviously, I prefaced it with everything in Ashes is a general statement. You can't apply it to every situation, but I think there's a lot that could be written about that, you know, people crave, like new players crave, whether it's written material or video material. Otherwise, you know, in this case, we do audio, but I don't know how many new players are listening to us. But, you know, like that, we should be putting more effort into that.
Yeah. You know, it's for what it's worth, Killer. I agree with you. Like, I think there's a high priority put on interactivity in the game, and I think that's important. But I do think there are ways in which the lines are very varied in their details, but at a high level, they do feel pretty samey when the game becomes all about the battlefield and other options aren't available. And it's been interesting. Nick Conley, designer of Ashes, and the Plaid Hat folks promoted a game that's not at all theirs. I mean, they didn't promote it. They played it on stream once, called Super Auto Pets, which is like an auto battler where you play these units and they just bang into each other until one side has units left and that side wins, and they're sort of in a line. And like, just as I've gotten really into it now. I've been playing it for several weeks since they featured it, basically, and it's really fun. And it's actually changed some of how I think about Ashes. Like, I actually feel like I much more now understand why 2/3s are so good in Ashes from playing this completely different auto battler. But I do think there's a real risk. Like, if you don't have a strong mill game, if you don't have the strong tall games or or burn, that it just becomes super auto pets. Like, your units just bang into each other and then someone wins as to whoever has units left.
Yeah.
And it's just becomes, there's obviously a lot more nuance in how that happens in the sequencing, which I think does and can carry a lot of interest, but I still think the game would be enriched by having more axes that are legitimate paths to victory.
Yeah, I just remember playing, you know, just here at GenCon against Still Toes Herald. There was a point early in the game where I had a massive growth bear and a jaguar on my battlefield, and he's sitting there with a hammer knight up to defend, right? And I knew in my heart, I knew that the right answer was that I should swing this bear at the Hammer Knight. Right? I knew that was right. I didn't do it because I knew that I could also put 6 damage on Herald by swinging both of them and gazing down the Hammer Knight. That was more fun to me to do. I knew it was wrong. Like I even as I did it, I was like, I'm gonna put this 6 damage on Herald, and he's gonna play a Phoenix Attendant next turn and heal it, and then consume soul, and most of it's gone. So why am I doing it? But I did it anyway, and I look back on that game, and it's like, you know why I did that? Because I was bored. I was bored at like just throwing units back and forth, which is what was happening in that game up to that point. And that's where I lost the game, by the way. I feel like once I made that play, I was behind on board forever after that. I never caught back up. And the only reason I ever got close to beating him was because he fatigued. And I just eventually pivoted to not fatiguing, and I almost pulled it out, but I fell behind at that point. And it was because I was bored. Like I could have sat there and swung the stupid bear at the Hammer Knight and forced his guard or killed the thing. And the game's completely different after that. But I was bored. I was like, I don't want to crash guys into it like themselves anymore. I want to do something cool. But it was the wrong cool thing to do.
I mean, I don't know. There are still aggressive decks like the Tristan Fish, that want to swing at the Phoenixborn directly and finish with burn. I know Ninja, for a while, he was playing some super just strong direct burn damage decks that weren't really trying to play board control, but just wanted to do primarily burn damage for the win. Those, like, burn is hard, and I think Jessa has seen a huge comeuppance ever since the errata, like in terms of just being that stable source of burn damage and being able to win on a smaller battlefield. But it's tricky, right? Because burn can so easily get out of control. It's really hard to balance it correctly. I am hopeful, though, that at least as far as Mill is concerned, that the charm set will present more options, because the Frostwild is definitely more battlefield centric. And outside of a few bypass options, I mean, we're still seeing, very strong standstill, or I've played against a lot of hypnotized decks lately, like just going for those big one punch hits. I've played a bunch of them. There are pseudo battlefield control, but really they're just bypass decks that are different enough that are fun to play. Big Mirror Spirit punches with explosive growth, still a ton of fun.
That stuff's fun, but the problem is if they can't beat redirect, then it just doesn't matter.
You got to wolf up.
Yeah, right.
You got to wolf up.
You got to wolf up.
So there's options.
I think the secret to Jessa is that she's actually a battlefield Phoenixborn. She's not a burn Phoenixborn.
That's the only way point.
Yeah. The only way you win with Jessa and burn is that you have to get ahead on battlefield, and then your opponent is totally hosed, because then they're forked. But yeah,
it's the secret to almost every Phoenixborn is that they're a battlefield Phoenixborn. That's the that's the thing. A lot of people love that about this game. I think, honestly, most or all, all except me is probably a bad way to put it, because I'm sure this isn't true, but a lot of people are going to tell you they like that about this game. I'm going to say the opposite, but that's just because I'm weird and want to be contrarian sometimes.
You're entitled to your weird contrarian opinions.
Yeah. it's a great thing.
I don't think it's that strange to say that you want other archetypes.
It's a great thing that we don't have to worry about getting burned out at the beginning of round 2 every game, right? That's great.
Yeah,
but
it's important.
It is, but I want there to be a threat of Like I don't want. I wish that deck was back. I honestly I find myself missing. I miss the Brennan Burn, like the all in Brennan Burn
That
deck.
is a
I
hot
miss
take.
It is, but I miss it because you're allowed to just play these slow, grindy decks, and you're just not punished for it anymore. I feel like, and there's not something out there to, just what I was saying at the beginning of the show. There's not something out there to check you for it right now. That's what the Brennan used to do, but it did get to a point where it wasn't just checking the slow decks; it was just beating everything. Right? We can't have that. So I've been working Brennan a little bit lately to try and bring it back because I want to find a way. I want to find something to check that.
Yeah, I think the thing that we're missing that it'd be nice to have. I don't think we didn't need to nuke the Brennan deck, and I don't think that was necessarily the intent. I mean, I think everyone's happy right now, but I think in truth, that the changes to Brennan probably took it a step too far. Hard to figure out in which direction, because I think what we needed, the first 5 mechanic is there to enable you to flex in different matchups. The trouble that we got to before JK started playing Brennan, the idea was, look, Brennan's a problem, especially when you're a new player, to figure out how to beat it. But like, as you become a more experienced player and a better deck builder, you build in your kind of Brennan first 5 and like your plan to go a little bit faster than the Brennan, who is going to be sacrificing stuff off their battlefield. Like, they are actively destroying their battlefield to advance their game plan, and you can go a little bit faster than them. And what JK demonstrated, first by just going incredibly fast and then slowing his opponent down with Law of Fear, was that like Brennan could just, there was no winning that race in any sort of consistent way. I think if we could just get back to the point where like that race is winnable if with the right kind of fast first 5. Like, I would love a world in which every deck needs, sort of fast first 5 option, or at least the first 5 that has to respond to the fast deck. And I feel like part of the challenge now is like your first 5 is often just your first 5. Like, how often are you guys drastically flexing your first 5 based on the matchup?
Not drastically anymore, but
yeah, not as drastic as Brennan. I mean, we talked a lot about possible counters to Brennan, and I don't dislike the changes, because side action and like 2 dice causing 8 damage was bonkers. Like, between Fire Archer, Final Cry, Spirit Burn, and whatever, it was silly. But if like Law of Grace or something, like if there was a card like that, but it was actually costed properly so that you could tech for some matches and force the Brennan player, at least in certain colors, off foot, that would be interesting. I didn't like the fact that the only way to beat Brennan was to race even faster, but by racing faster, you had to have the tools that really just made Brennan more powerful anyway. Some of the best counters to Brennan were just like, oh, Raptor Herder to have enough units to stop Widows and have your own Widows. And it was like, it just got silly with a lot of things. Or you would have to play 4 counter cards and then you lose in round 2 anyway because they still get a ton of damage. Those weren't fun times, but maybe the pendulum is too far the other way. I've had success with Brennan, or at least I haven't played in a few months now, but like I was on a good roll with my Brennan burn deck. I think Jessa is still, like, maybe it's control Phoenixborn, but she still can win on burn majority, depending on your deck.
I don't think Jessa's fast enough.
Not fast, but you can't, like, in terms of like just burn as a general archetype, I think it still has a place.
I mean, burn can still close games. I don't think anyone's saying it can't. I want there to be something out there that can win quickly and punish a deck that wants to set up and that wants to spend time setting up. I feel like there should be a penalty for that. I don't think there really is right now.
Probably the closest. Fishton is like the
but Nature's Wrath just beats that. Like you put a Nature's Wrath in your first 5 and then you just get to set up again. maybe the Sacred Ground fish deck needs to come back. But
Still two played that, I think, too.
yeah, that's
Sacred Ground Fish. That's what he played.
I think so, back in the day.
I think he did once. And whoever got me for Secret Santa gave me that deck way back in December. Might have been him, actually. I don't remember now. Maybe that deck needs to come back because it beats Nature's Wrath, but then it wastes another turn setting up by playing Sacred Ground, so I don't know. Anywho, we're way off topic, and it's after midnight, and if you can't tell, my voice is already dying. We should probably wrap this up.
Actually, this is something I forgot about, but one final question, and this probably could spawn an entire other conversation. No. Because I have the Plaid Hat website open and it's like just staring me in the face the entire time. If Plaid Hat marketed, whatever, the Ashes the same way that Summoner Wars is done, so like subscription based online, app, like that type of thing, because otherwise they're very similar, like regularly released content, subscription based, extendable card game, that type of thing. Would that be, and they support events, would that be enough from, like, because we talked about sort of the two sides of things, would that be enough from the external factor?
Maybe. I don't think we're going to know until it happens. I can tell you at GenCon that there were 16 players for the Ashes tournament and 16 for the Summoner Wars tournament. I don't know what that says about anything. I know that 30 people signed up for Ashes and only 16 showed up. I don't know if that was a Lorcana problem because it was Thursday morning and that was right after the Lorcana line, or Line Kana as people were calling it, happened, and there was all kinds of craziness at Gen Con surrounding that, and maybe people were stuck in that. But I expected to go over to the Summoner Wars table and see like a massive thing happening, and there were only 16 of them too. So I don't know. But I do know that their online scene is a lot more vibrant, and their Discord goes 5 times as fast as ours. So it's certainly a lot more buzzy, if I can use that word. And I would love for Ashes to see that.
There's no deck building in that game. I mean,
there is deck building, but nobody does it. I think is the thing. I kind of wish people would, because it's pretty cool what they built in for it. But I think their events even are mostly base deck type events. Anywho, I would love to see our Discord have the number of users and the amount of chatter that theirs does, for sure.
All right. So new tournaments, better deck recommendations. What else do we say? Shmeny, you're the
undo the Brennan. Bring Brennan Byrne back.
Bring back old
that'll
Brennan.
definitely improve the new player experience.
Yeah.
I miss it, man.
I think that's just the new challenge. And that's all I'm going to be doing. Building either Brennan Byrne or Sacred Ground Fish. See how that goes.
Part of this is because I'm really mad at my ability to pilot decks lately, and I'm just trying to find something that doesn't need to be piloted well to win.
Autoplay deck.
Yeah. Autoplay.deck.
Win on ashes.live, not on Ash Techie. That's what everybody wants to do, right?
Yeah. All right, guys. We solved it. We solved the new player experience now. New player experience solved.
Yeah. And we made a lot of enemies, so that's good.
Yeah. I don't know if we solved it or just created more problems.
Yeah, or more work for us, one or the other. But who's going to sign us off? I started it today. Who's ending it?
Shmeny's been on vacation, so he needs to put in some work.
There you go.
If you're not janky, you're stanky. Is that enthusiastic enough?
Frog up. Wolf up. Yeah.
Wolf down.
Wolf up is the
no,
name.
you got to wolf down.
Oh, that's true.
frog
You got
up
to
and
wolf down. That's
Frog
right.
up,
Okay.
wolf down.
Okay.
Now I feel like we're throwing up gang signs, like frog up, wolf down, west side.
Now I need a new shirt.
Yeah.
All
Frog
right.
up, wolf down.
There we go.
All right, guys.
All right, later.
Time for me to go to sleep. Peace.
Have a good one.